me. I have a translation of today's gospel that is not in that book. So I'm just going to read it to you, and then we'll think about it. And, listening, I was amazed at how much all these verses today all flow together, confront us with some reality. So this is the reading, Matthew 5:13 to 20. "Let me tell you why you are here," said Jesus. "You are here to be salt seasoning that brings out the God flavors of this earth. If you lose your saltiness, how will people taste godliness? You have lost your usefulness and will end up in the garbage." Here's another way to put it. You're here to be light, bringing out the God colors in the world. God is not a secret to be kept. We're going public with this, as public as a city on a hill. If I make you light bearers, don't you think I'm going to hide you? You don't think I'm going to hide you under a bucket, do you? I'm putting you on a light stand. Now that I've put you there on a hilltop on a light stand, shine. Keep open the house. Be generous with your lives. By opening up to others, you will prompt people to open up with God, this generous Father in heaven. Don't suppose for a minute that I have come to demolish the scriptures, either God's law or the prophets. I'm not here to demolish, but to complete. I'm going to put it all together. Put it all together in a vast panorama. God's law is more real and lasting than the stars in the sky and the ground at your feet. Long after stars burn out and earth wears out, God's law will be alive and working. Trivialize even the smallest item in God's law, and you will only have trivialized yourself. But take it seriously, show the way for others, and you will find honor in the kingdom. Unless you do far better than the Pharisees in the matter of right living, you won't know the first thing about entering the kingdom. This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Please be seated. Can you hear me okay if I move this mic a little bit more? My voice is not in the greatest shape. It's great to be here among you today. Those of you that know my wife Susan may be wondering, where's Sue? Well, she's at home. Sue had eye surgery this week. That is, she had her cataracts removed, and she's recovering bit for a bit. You're blessed. Yeah. So I decided for today to read that. This is from a version of the scriptures, a paraphrase really, called The Message. And it's amazing how alive the scriptures come when read in a more contemporary kind of language. So the issue here is all these lessons we heard today, Isaiah and Corinthians and Matthew, they all are on the same theme. And we have Jesus in the gospel lesson raising the issue of the reality of the community of God. It's reality. What he asks for is that his followers actually follow him, Jesus, like disciples, who will get what he and God are about. And that means we're not asked to boil everything down to one thing, one way of talking about faith, or declaring that one pack of doctrines and beliefs that we must obey. And if other Christians have a different way of believing, we condemn them for being wrong. It's happened over and over and over in history. Insistence on a certain fiercely doctrinal approach to a way of living has been trouble in the church since the beginning. And the misguidance of people also is there, down through history forever and ever. Let me speak a bit of truth to you about Lutherans. Us good old Lutherans. What have we done? In the history of some Lutherans of various kinds, they have rejected other Lutherans of various kinds because they did not agree with every little bit of doctrine. We have Lutherans who have refused to even pray with other brands of Lutheranism, who do not teach some specific doctrine in a particular way. If you don't believe that, you're going straight to hell. The world will have nothing to do with you. That's the attitude. Guess what? Jesus didn't teach that. That wasn't his way. Jesus wants all his followers to get along with each other in terms of caring people, people that want to do things right, to help other people, to be open to inviting people who are different to come and be with us. Welcome aboard. He wants kindness and acceptance for others to be our teaching and the way we really live. In other words, what he's hoping for is that we will attempt to live the way of Jesus, the one who's making these statements. So there was a theologian, he has died, a theologian and wonderful person in the 20th century by the name of Hans Küng. He was a Swiss pastor and teacher. He wrote a large and provocative book called Being Christian. Whole book that thick about being Christian. What a job, huh? At the core of the book is what he brings forth as the reality of Jesus in a time of great trouble in the world. Jesus lived in a time of chaos and pain like what we're experiencing around the world and in our country these days. That's what it was like. So in this book, he writes about how Jesus came into the life of the world to show us God, to make sure we understand all are welcome, and that we would ponder the reality of all the trouble there is in the world, in our churches, in our families, in the marketplace, in the country, in the world. And he saw and wanted to present and live what God the Father is working on. The growth of love and justice and peace. We heard that in the other scriptures today. He saw God the Father working for the growth of love and justice and peace among all peoples. He came to know himself as the coming of the light of the good news for the world. That's what we contemplate today. How is this the case? It's so crucial that we see what Jesus himself faced. The Gospels are full of this, which is to say that if we read the Gospels, we cannot ignore the reality that Jesus faced. He was despised by many of his own people, his nation. He was despised because he did not join them in their attitude and beliefs and rules, but turned away and did something else. And the political and religious beliefs and groups in Jesus' day were, guess what? Similar to some of today's warped views of neighbors and immigrants in our country and elsewhere in the world. That's what life was like with Jesus. That's what it's like now. These battles don't seem to go away. And so the political and religious beliefs and groups in Jesus' day were very much warped ways, like neighbors, views of neighbors and immigrants in our era. He didn't join political or religious groups, Jesus. He belonged to God's justice and love for the world. Jesus' whole work, his whole mission, was to plant in the hearts and minds of the people around him the wonderful presence of the reality of a welcoming, loving God. That's what it's all about. If we're not about that, we're on the wrong track. In fact, in matters of judgment, Jesus was more vocal about not the religious doctrines that some groups were teaching, but the needs and longings of the common folks with whom he spent a lot of time. Spent most of his 3 years in a mission among such people, the ordinary people, the sick, the poor, the broken. That's what he did. And then guess what? He was killed for teaching the poor about the reality of God's dawn of universal love and healing in the cosmos. That he, Jesus, proclaimed that as the truth. He announced to the thousands of his followers, as we read and heard this morning, I'm going to read a portion of this again. This was Jesus talking to the people who gathered around him. We're going public with this, as public as a city on a hill. If I make you light bearers, you don't think I'm going to hide you under a bucket, do you? I'm putting you on a light stand. Now that I've put you there on a hilltop, a light stand, what did he want? Shine. Shine. The love and welcome of God. Shine. By opening up to others, he says, you will prompt people to open up to God. This generous Father in heaven. In his controversial teaching, he was always controversial among his people, especially for the common folk of his day. His goal was to teach and live the essence of what the first 5 books of the Bible really say, and what they are, what they're for. We can also call it the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, filled with rules of all kinds. But what are those for? For the larger group, for the truth of God, how to live with justice and love and peace. And like the prophets, Jesus offered a vision of a faithful community that's possible. A faithful community seeing every act and every pattern of living pointing to the God whose name is mercy. Mercy. Now to get a little personal here, I was baptized on Valentine's Day, 1943. I can compute how old I am. And I was blessed. I didn't know at the time, I was just a cute little baby. But I was blessed, I discovered later, by a very ordinary, very down-to-earth people. They were immigrants. In this case, Norwegian immigrants. Farmers, teachers, carpenters, fishermen, all hard workers, committed to their work and their community life, but also committed to Jesus. It calls the highway patrol to take care of that motorcycle. Most or all of my ancestors arrived in the United States with little money. In fact, they had to depend on some who were already here. And I think about this often, almost every day. To follow Jesus is not primarily to get a degree in theology, but it is to become, in one way or another, more like him, Jesus. To follow Jesus is not the degree in theology. And so it's more seeking to be like with God among people in human form. And so what's the first thing that the immigrants did upon arriving in this country? Once they had a place to live, a little shack or mud hut or whatever, what's the first thing they built next? Church. Church. Churches all over the place. And then after churches, guess what? Schools and colleges. And after that, then in various cities in which they lived, they built hospitals. There are Lutheran hospitals all over the place, as well as hospitals of other faiths as well. They knew what Jesus taught. And these poor people, they did their best to live his way. And so now, here you are today, sitting here in these pews, listening to this guy, a community of God's people. Why are you here? You're committed to be like Jesus, to be what Jesus wants of us all. A church aspiring to real, down-to-earth things, like people who aren't with us yet, like Jesus, welcoming new ones into the community. The happy evening dinners you have here, and the coffee and snacks like what we'll have after church this morning. And the diapers you give away. The commitment of funds and prayer for this community and for the world. And open doors ready to welcome people with the love of God. Come on in, folks. To welcome people into the love of God among us. Not flashy, but really down to earth. As the saying would go with this particular text, like the salt of the earth. That's who we are. Salt of the earth. Caring for the world as Jesus wants us to do. You're here to be salt seasoning that brings out the God flavors on this earth.